So how many years later was it that you decided that you were going to find out exactly what happened to your friend?
Well, over the years, as I grew older, I got married, I had kids, but all the time I was thinking that John had been a vibrant 19-year-old who was such an extrovert sort of person, and one minute he was there and the next minute he sort of, that was it. And it just kept haunting me. I wanted to know what happened to him. And eventually I wrote to the place where they have all the records of serving people in Chelmsford. Gave them what information I had, which was his name, his rank, when he got killed, and why, you know,
The raid he was on, yeah.
Going. And that's all, and the fact that he lived in Ashford in Middlesex, and his mother and father lived there, and he was a scoutmaster, and that's all I could give them.
Right.
And they wrote back, and they said, oh yes, John O'Sullivan, and his number, which I haven't got, Sergeant Rear Gunner, killed on the 2nd of June 1940. I think it was 40 or 41, I can't remember now. On the 1000 bomber raid to Cologne, shot down over Holland, and buried in Gendringen Roman Catholic Cemetery. Well, I knew he was a Roman Catholic. So eventually, after a lot of years of sort of trying to sort out, this was the information I got. In 2006, I went to Holland. I'd written to the Catholic priest at Gendringen, gave him the information and said, can you tell me if John is buried here? And he wrote back, lovely man, and he said, yes, he's buried in my cemetery. We have Liberation Day celebrations on May the 6th, May the 5th, May the 6th. But on May the 5th we have a commemoration service for the Air Force people who were shot down over Gendringen during the war. You'd be very welcome to attend. So I had a word with my daughter, Sue, and she said, yes, I'll come with you. And John, her husband, said, well, I'm not letting you both go over to Holland on your own. I'll come with you and drive you there. Mm-hmm. So we flew over to Amsterdam, we hired a car, and John drove us to Gendringen. And we knocked on the door of the presbytery there, and Father Marcel opened the door. Lovely man who originated from New Zealand. And he welcomed us and gave us a wonderful meal and showed us our rooms. And the next morning he introduced us to people who had been around at that time. They were all elderly. One man had got had been in the office, and he'd been in contact with the German Luftwaffe commandant. Another man looked after all the graves since the action happened and cared for the graves. Another man was there as a 17-year-old boy on the crash site when it actually happened. Another man had opened a museum of replicas of war machines that had crashed. And I got a lot of information that I had no idea I would get. And from all that, apparently, on the day of the crash, the bomber was brought down by a night fighter. The pilot whose name was Adolf Hessler, and this aircraft crashed in this field. Most of the crew, well, 95% of the crew were killed or died of their injuries then. But this young man who was 17, this young Dutchman, told me that he saw somebody on the fence line of the field, some way away from the crash. And he walked across, and it was a young airman who was limping. He was badly injured in his leg. And he said, well, you stay there and I'll get an ambulance, I'll get a stretcher, get help. And he said he was a fair-haired young man. And he said, I didn't know which part of the crew he was. But as I turned away to go and get the stretcher, the aircraft just blew up because it was still loaded with bombs, and the bombs just went up. He said, I was flung into the air and I was taken away to hospital. But I was kept saying, that young man, he's still there. And they said, no, there was nothing there. But a bit of clothing was found, and one thing and another. And in one of the pockets there was a rosary. Now that's a Catholic emblem. Now whether John, as a Catholic, that could have been John, I don't know. I shall never know. It's sufficient to say that they were all killed. Now the German Luftwaffe commandant came across to the scene of the crash. He wanted the atmosphere of the Germans and the Dutch people to be friendlier. And he was hoping that they would, from the actions of the Germans, would make a lot of difference to the feelings of the Dutch people. But of course it didn't. I mean, they had a very, very fierce resistance, and they hated the Germans.
Yeah.
So he ordered a burial with honours for the crew of this airplane, and they were taken to Gendringen, which is the nearest village, with an escort of German Air Force people, I suppose. And they were buried in Gendringen Church with full military honours. Now normally they just chuck a body in the hedge and that's it. But John was one of the lucky ones. He was buried, and he's buried and he lies peacefully there. And that was it. I knew exactly what had happened. So that night they had the commemoration of the fallen, and they asked me if I would lay a wreath on the tomb of the of my friend. So I said yes, I would. I'd be honoured to do that. And we had a small service in the church, and then we walked through Gendringen village, and the villagers were all lined up, and there wasn't a sound except for the drum beating just in front of me, and we walked holding this wreath to the cemetery, and then we stood there in front of the graves, and the band played Abide With Me, because they thought that would be something I knew. So they honoured me in that way. And after saying various prayers in Dutch, and then the Lord's Prayer in English, and then the last post was sounded, and the flags of England and Holland were lowered, and I went forward with this wreath with a man from the council, sort of executive, who helped me carry it because it was a great big thing. And we laid this wreath on John's grave. And I stood there and said a prayer, and then I walked back. And then they played the national anthem of Holland and the national anthem of Great Britain, and then it was over. He'd been on leave for 5 weeks, waiting for this. He said there was something big coming up, and he said he was on extended leave, and we went out and we enjoyed ourselves. We had 5 weeks of, fun. And then suddenly, no longer. And I just felt that all those years of wondering what happened to John and what it was all about, was at peace.
Yeah. You'd finally found out what had happened.